Welcome to Access Zen with Gregory Foster. Our program will help you set a more perfect balance between your inner world and the outside world. And now, here's your host, Gregory Foster.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing out there today? Another beautiful day here in Huntington Beach, California as we broadcast live. Another great show to share with you today. The theme for today's show is how to thrive in the most challenging of circumstances. And we have two absolutely outstanding guests on. The first guest is Marshall Lewis from the Viktor Frankl Institute, and he's going to tell us all about Viktor Frankl's work as well as his own work in logotherapy and basically how folks begin to choose their own attitude and work through very difficult circumstances and situations. And so Marshall Lewis will be coming on in a moment, and he'll be sharing that with us. And then our second guest after the break is going to be Drs. Bonnie and David Paul from the University of Santa Monica, and they're going to be talking about a similar theme with inmates at the Valley State Prison up in Chowchilla, California. And we'll be having them on right after the break, and they're going to be talking about their award-winning documentary, Freedom to Choose. So again, thank you for joining. I'm Gregory Foster, your host, and you're listening to Access Zen. And our first guest is Marshall Lewis. Marshall, how are you this morning?
I'm just fine, Greg. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
How's everything there in Kansas today?
Everything in Kansas here is good. We've had a little bit of a cold snap, so we might look a little bit longingly at Huntington Beach, I think, today.
Yeah, I think as we were talking at the top of the hour, it's all relative. When we get down below 50 degrees, it probably feels like freezing for you down there.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. 50 degrees is a nice day here this time of year.
Yeah, I certainly understand that. Well, hey, thanks for joining the show today. We're very excited to have you on. Again, as you know, our theme is how to thrive in the most challenging of circumstances. And obviously, some of the work that you've done deals with some folks that have been through some pretty difficult circumstances. So I wanted to kind of turn that over to you, and maybe you could give us a little update on exactly who you are, what you do, and tell us a little bit about logotherapy, and then we can kind of maybe get into Viktor Frankl's work. Okay,
sure, absolutely. Well, I am a psychotherapist. I've been a therapist for about 25 years. For the past 4 years, I've been studying logotherapy. I'm at the point in my life, kind of a halfway point in my life, where I'm transitioning from the type of therapy I did before in the first part of my life, first part of my career, which was more traditional cognitive behavioral kinds of therapy, into the more meaning-centered kind of therapy, which is logotherapy. Logotherapy is the name of the type of therapy that Viktor Frankl developed. Maybe I could tell you a little bit about logotherapy at this point, which is what I'm trying to do now in the second part of my career, which is Frankl's method. Logotherapy is based on the idea that the main motivation for human beings is not seeking pleasure, as Sigmund Freud suggested. It's not seeking power or to compensate for an inferiority complex like Alfred Adler suggested, but it is rather to find meaning and purpose in their lives, to get a sense that their lives count for something. Frankl called that the will to meaning as the main motivation for the human person. Now, one thing that makes Frankl particularly different from other types of philosophies or other types of therapies who might say the same thing is that Frankl was able to break down this concept of a will to meaning into very concrete terms that people could understand and apply to their lives.
Now, just so our, I'm sorry to interrupt you, so our listeners understand, tell us a little bit about Viktor Frankl and his experiences and how he came to these observations, because it's an incredible story for our listeners.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Frankl was a young psychiatrist living in Vienna at the time when the Nazis annexed Austria. So because he was a doctor, he was able to stay out of the concentration camps for a while. But eventually the Nazis caught up with him and his family, and he spent About 3.5 years in 4 separate concentration camps. That is the part of this story that makes logotherapy so interesting, because beyond just being theory and some academic approach to human suffering, Viktor Frankl was actually there in the trenches as a prisoner suffering and was able to apply these principles while he was in the concentration camps to try to maintain a sense of human dignity and of human meaning under the worst possible circumstances I think any of us could imagine.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't realize he had been in 4 different concentration camps. That's pretty amazing.
I'm not sure about how that process worked, but he was transferred from camp to camp. I don't know that was particularly unusual, but between 1942 and 1945, he was in 4 separate camps.
1942 to 1945, so 3 years of living in the worst of conditions across 4 multiple camps.
Yeah.
And what were some of the things that he was able to observe?
Well, what he observed was that meaning could be found in some of the smallest things, and that even if the ways in which most of us find meaning, say by the work that we do or through the people that we know and love, things that are the most meaningful to people under normal circumstances, even if those things were completely taken away, it was still possible to maintain or to discover the meaning of a given situation by choosing your attitude toward a situation. One quote that I have from him, and this is not his most famous quote, but this is also from his most famous book, Man's Search for Meaning. He notes that even in a concentration camp, there were always choices to make. Every day, every hour, offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, renouncing freedom and dignity to become molded into the form of the typical inmate. And so by choosing not to do that, by choosing to give away a piece of bread when you were starving, or by choosing to share a blanket when you were freezing, he found things just that small to fill life such as it was with meaning and to maintain one's humanity.
That's amazing. So he made those discoveries of folks in those worst of conditions, still able to be generous, still able to find joy and to share that with other people. Is that right?
That's right. Now, they were in a minority, and he mentions that. This was just not something that was easy to do by any means, but it was possible to do.
So let me ask you this. What did he observe? Because obviously we've seen a lot of, challenging circumstances, with the different natural events that have occurred. And I'm thinking most recently of what happened in Louisiana during the hurricanes and some of the horrific things we heard about human behavior. So You're talking about folks in the minority who, under the worst conditions, make really good choices. What do you think it is that differentiates one person over another?
Well, according to Frankl, it is realizing the freedom to choose your attitude. I think many of us don't think about our attitude as a fundamental choice. Frankl would encourage us to think about our attitude as a fundamental choice, that we can choose to say yes to life, no matter what the circumstances. And that ability to say yes to life is a choice that we must make. If we don't make it, then all of the things that traditional psychology would tell us about human nature tend to come to the foreground. We become robots. We become just the products of a conditioned environment. But we do have that ability to choose to not give up on life, to choose to be fully alive human beings, no matter what the circumstances are. And in that, Frankl was able to discover the meaning of suffering. To be able to face suffering with that type of attitude does fill it with meaning. It becomes a human achievement at that point. The worst thing that can happen to you, depending on how you choose your attitude, can become for you the greatest achievement of your life.
That's amazing. So now let's move forward into the present time, and in your logotherapy, tell us about some of the individual work that you're doing along these same lines and how you work with other people on their attitudes. And then maybe we could transition that to our listeners who obviously in their day-to-day life, they face some pretty challenging circumstances, although certainly not at a Nazi concentration level, we would hope.
Oh, right. Right.
So go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, right, certainly. I mean, where I live in Kansas, we tend to be generalists, so I don't really specialize in any particular type of client. We see, we and the people that, I and the people that I work with, we see all kinds of people from all walks of life, young and old, rich and poor, a variety of different kinds of problems, depression, anxiety, and so forth. And at the very heart of it, everyone suffers. Everyone has a pain, a hurt that they're dealing with. And the human response to pain is always the same type of response. It always involves that freedom to choose. And what logotherapy does, and what I try to do with my clients, is get them to make that choice to say yes, to not give up on themselves, to decide to face life's circumstances the way life is presenting itself to them.
Wow, that's pretty profound work. That's wonderful.
Well, it is. It's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. You're going to talk to your guests soon about the freedom to choose, and I might give you another quote from Frankl, which is the most famous quote from his popular book, Man's Search for Meaning, which has sold 10 million copies worldwide. His most famous quote is, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men that walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And that is the core, that is the heart of logotherapy, of Viktor Frankl's work.
That's profound. That's profound, Marshall. Thank you so much. So, love to have you perhaps on at another time to get further into your work, but for our listeners know how to reach you and what you're up to, please share, because we're about to go to a break, and then we're going to have Doctors Bonnie and David on to talk about the Freedom to Choose project that we're referencing here today.
Sure. Well, thank you, Greg. I can be reached through my website, which is www.defiantpower.com. It's Defiant Power, all one word. Frankl talked about the defiant power of the human spirit. And more about logotherapy, you can learn through my podcast, which is www.logotalk.net. And that's LOGO talk.net.
Well, we will be sure to check that out. And again, thank you so much for being with us today, and I really appreciate it, and you have yourself a wonderful week.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm Gregory Foster, your host, and you're listening to Access Zen. And after our break, we're going to be back to talk with Doctors Bonnie and David about the Freedom to Choose project from the University of Santa Monica. Stay tuned.
What do you do when you feel trapped or stuck? What if 2 days could change your life? The California budget crisis means thousands of inmates will be released into our communities without the skills needed to make different choices than the ones that got them into prison in the first place. You can help. There is something you can do. Support the Freedom to Choose Foundation. We teach practical skills in a 2-day workshop that's been recommended by over 95% of previous participants. Visit our website, freedomtochoose.net, and make a tax-deductible donation. You can also join us and become a community volunteer. Visit our website, freedomtochoose.net, and learn why Veronica said, "Freedom to choose saved my life." A tax-deductible donation of any size helps. Together, we have the freedom to choose to make a difference.
And now, let's return to Access Zen.
And we're back, and good morning. I'm Gregory Foster, your host, and you're listening to Access Zen, and we're continuing with our theme today of how to thrive in the most challenging circumstances. You just heard Marshall Lewis talking about Viktor Frankl and his logotherapy work, and I'm very thrilled to have on with us Doctors Bonnie and David Paul from the University of Santa Monica, who have put together this beautiful project that helps women up at the Valley State Prison in Chowchilla, California. They also have to tell a great story to tell you there, and a great story to tell you about their award-winning documentary, Freedom to Choose, which, of course, is the theme of our show. So, Doctors Bonnie and David, how are you this morning?
Good morning. Doing fine, Greg. Nice to be here with you.
It's so nice to have you with us. How's your week going?
Well, it's as always, there's good things and challenges, and we've been working on expanding this work to other places in addition to the Valley State Prison for Women. So it's been kind of an exciting week in that regard.
Well, we certainly want you to share that with us. Obviously, we want you to start telling us about who are you and who is the University of Santa Monica? Where is the University of Santa Monica?
Well, the University of Santa Monica is located in Santa Monica, California, which is Los Angeles. It's a private graduate school. It really specializes in master's degrees in spiritual psychology, one of the only places in the world, I believe, that does that. And they're about to graduate their 30th class, so they've been around a little bit over 30 years. That's
awesome. And as our listeners may know from looking at my bio, I am a graduate of the University of Santa Monica. I believe I was in the class of 28, and very proud to say that. And I can say for any of our listeners, and we'll get into a little bit about what is spiritual psychology in a moment, but I just want to say it's a profound experience as anyone can have. The 2 years that I invested in myself in doing that work was phenomenal. So in light of that, what is spiritual psychology?
Well, spiritual psychology basically looks at the world and says, if we are all divine beings having a human experience, and our purpose here is to grow in consciousness, to learn as souls, to evolve spiritually, how do we look at psychology in a way that is useful to us? And so a lot of people hear the word spiritual and they think it might have some sort of religious connection, and it does not. It's open to all faiths, and actually people who don't have any faith often take the program.
From the viewing point, or from the context of spiritual psychology, since everyone is divine, everyone is inherently worthy, everyone is worthy of respect, everyone is worthy of loving, and at the core of each person is a loving essence, and that loving essence is what we believe is probably the best working definition of spiritual that we have right now.
That's a beautiful definition, the loving essence. So it's an experiential phenomena from the inside out. Is that right?
Yes, and that's it's one of those experiences that when people have it, they can relate to other people who have it, and it's really an experience that goes beyond words, which makes it, of course, difficult to describe on the radio. Which is why the documentary actually was so exciting, and we can get to that in a little bit.
That's great. So how did, and obviously this is an incredible story when you think about Valley State, which my understanding is the fourth largest full correctional facility for women in the world. Is that right?
Well, the numbers shift on a daily basis, and so
fifth, yes.
The way that we've heard it is it's one of the largest. That kind of keeps them in safe statistical territory.
Right. Statistics switch around all the time.
Exactly.
So how did the University of Santa Monica come to be involved with Valley State? What's that story?
Well, it's one of the women who's actually featured in the documentary, Rhonda, was reading one of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, and she looked in the resources of the book that's, in the back and wrote to every single person on the resource list a letter asking if someone would be willing to come to a Valley State Prison and give a talk on self-esteem. She felt that a lot of the women who were at the prison had very low self-esteem, and it would be great if someone could give a talk about it to help them be more effective in their lives. And she sent that to everyone, and including the president of the university, Ron Holnick. And he got the letter, and he didn't know quite what to do with it, but it was a very compelling letter.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I'm just going to put it in a someday maybe category. And about a year later, the third year of the University of Santa Monica is a class called Consciousness, Health, and Healing. And it takes the principles and the practices and the skills that are taught in the first 2 years and applies it specifically to the area of radiant health. Both Bonnie and I are faculty in that class, and part of that class is service, doing a service project. And so Ron figured, well, maybe this would be a good service project for one of the students to go up for the day and give a talk on self-esteem. And he wrote back to Rhonda and talked about this concept, and she kind of divinely misunderstood or reinterpreted his comments and said, well, it'd be great if you could bring the class up. And then Ron goes, well, that would be interesting. What if we took a bunch of USM grads, specifically people in the Consciousness, Health, and Healing program, and brought them up there and did USM skills in trios, working in groups of 3 for a day. And that's how the idea evolved. And he presented this at a faculty meeting, and both Bonnie and I kind of independently during the meeting felt a calling inside, and we talked about that after the meeting and volunteered to facilitate, lead the group and facilitate the process. And that was in the fall of 2003, and after a couple of site visits, we took the first group up in March 2004.
Wow. So this is a fairly recent project. Really think about the last 7 years, right?
Yes, and we didn't really know what was going to happen. We started with working with a group of about 56 lifers, and these are women serving life sentences. Some are eligible for parole and some are not. And we didn't know if they would be receptive to the same practices that we teach in a master's degree program in spiritual psychology. And they were, of course, nervous on their side. What would we think of them? And so It was quite a beautiful meeting to discover that we had so much in common. Because, of course, every human knows pain. Every human knows joy. Every human is really seeking love.
So you're just really finding that level of common ground between everyone, right?
It was, it was an amazing first experience. We were told that it would be a very successful program if only 1/3 of the participants left at the first break. If 2/3 would stay after the first break, it was considered wildly successful. So we didn't have anyone leave after the first break, and the only people who didn't return to the program were sort of required by the prison to be somewhere else during the program, which happens because of internal prison dynamics. So it was, as we were describing to Ron after the event, if we would have had expectations, then they would have been exceeded. But in terms of the reception and the success of the program.
And when David speaks of Ron, he's referring to the president of the University of Santa Monica, Ron Holnick.
Yes, and for our listeners, I would again encourage you to go out to the USM website and learn all about the University of Santa Monica. Just a wonderful experience there. So tell the listeners, and I get, because obviously I've experienced this with you myself a few times, and it's just an overwhelming, overpowering experience of going in and not really knowing what to expect. The prison itself is a little daunting the first time you see it, and then you get into this group. So For a listener who's never seen the video, which I again would encourage everyone to go out and watch because it's really going to take your breath away. I've seen it about 20 times, and each time I see it, it just blows me away. What is the actual work that you do? Can you set the backdrop up for us? And then we're going to go to a break in about 2 minutes, and then I definitely want you to come back and tell us about the documentary.
The backdrop for the work would be we're going in, each of us as human beings, and we're not going in as I'm an expert or I'm better or I'm worse than. We're going in saying we want to share about some skills we've learned. We want to share about a way that we've discovered to access that part of inside of ourselves that is the loving part, the spiritual part. And to the degree that we can each do that, and one of the interesting things about the environment is it's such a harsh environment because it's a medium to maximum security prison, which is, for the United States, is relatively speaking, a very harsh environment. It calls forward, people call themselves forward in a greater way. There's a greater degree of motivation because there is, and this is why the work is based on Viktor Frankl stuff, there is an inherent search inside to connect to the deepest place possible, the authentic place. From that place, the meaning like organically emerges when people are at that place. And the other piece is, from that place, when people are connected to that loving essence inside, at that level, there is no difference between anybody. That is it's like an experience of connection that's very, very deep. There's no difference between someone who's in prison from someone who's out of prison from someone who, it just doesn't matter, because at that level, everyone is, in fact, equal, because there's a very deep level of connection that's experienced.
Wow. And on that note, I'll let the listeners let that kind of sink in for a second. We're going to go to a break. You're listening to Gregory Foster, and this is Access Zen.
And now, let's return to Access Zen.
And we're back with Bonnie and David Paul from the University of Santa Monica, and we're just talking about some of the experience that they had with the inmates at the Valley State Prison. So David, please continue.
You know, I was so present in the moment, I have to say, remind me where I left off.
We were just kind of getting into, now you're up there, not knowing quite what to expect with the inmates and how they are starting to open up, the common ground between folks outside the prison and inside the prison, how it's at the core, we're all pretty much the same. We've all gone through the same experiences of joy and suffering, just they've made a different choice, and you were kind of getting into, that process within the prison itself when you're there with your event.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that has been so amazing to watch in the course of the 7 years that we've been doing this project is to see the roles that we all come in with melting away. And so, especially in a prison setting, the women are very used to being told that they're inmates, they're the bad people, and the prison staff and the people in what they call the free world are the good people. And so what we do, we're not disputing that they've made choices and taken actions that cause them to appropriately be where they are. However, what we know in psychology is that if they leave the prison with that definition of, I'm a bad person, it's going to be much harder for them to suddenly shift to become the productive members of society that we really all want for them, and themselves included. And so in the workshop, we do our best to level the playing field so that we all share about our lives. We share about the challenges that we have. The exercises that we do are designed to help actually heal the underpinnings of anger and of hurt so that the natural joy within the human being can bubble forth. And And just as Viktor Frankl observed very accurately, everyone is searching for meaning, including women who are serving life sentences in prison. And one of the biggest challenges that the mental health staff talk about there is helping those women find hope. And we have stumbled upon a way that really supports them in discovering meaning in their lives and really discovering that they can live a life of service. They can live a life where they help others, even in a medium to maximum security prison. So there's a great deal of joy and purpose. They all have jobs, and they teach each other. The lifers now that have a lot of skills after these 7 years have started their own classes where they teach the women who are what they call short-termers, or they're going to be leaving the prison soon.
There's a strong, as people heal the hurts and the circumstances that resulted in the behaviors and choices that ultimately ended in incarceration, who they are, in psychology terms, we would in spiritual psychology, their authentic self emerges in a greater way, and that's from that place. There's a natural call to be of service to others. Viktor Frankl kind of described that in his most famous quote. They may have been in the concentration camps. They may have been few in number. I would say at Valley State Prison for Women, we have about 150 women who we call mentors, who have taken the class more than once, who come back to serve their fellow inmates and the families of the fellow inmates, because they know that these skills are passed down and worked with families. So there's a natural call to moving forward and sharing it in a greater way, because it works really well.
So I want to get into a couple concepts, but before I do that, share with our listeners, how often are you going out to the prison at Valley State currently?
Well, it's an all-volunteer service project, and that includes David and myself. And so we take with us approximately, the team has grown to 70 volunteers per each project. We go twice a year, and the volunteers are all graduates of the University of Santa Monica's master's degree program in spiritual psychology, and they travel from all over the country. They fly in at their own expense to spend 3 days with the women of Valley State Prison.
There's a waiting list for volunteers, as you're aware.
Very much so. And so our listeners know, I've done 3, and I'm about to do my 4th. So we're still doing twice a year at Valley State, is that right, or is that now expanded to 3?
We're currently still doing twice a year, and one of the questions that we had coming from a psychology background is what difference could it possibly make to go for 2 days or 3 days twice a year in the lives of women? Because in our lives, in the free world, as they would call us, it requires a lot more consistent involvement in order to make lasting change in one's life. And they absolutely blew us away. They were so hungry for change, and they were so grateful to receive the training that we share with them, that they keep those skills alive in between our visits. We offer them very step-by-step handouts. So when we teach, for example, one of the skills we teach is called personal responsibility. We offer them a handout that steps them through the process and asks them questions like, what are the choices that I'm making that continue to perpetuate the situation that I don't like? So it really asks people to look deeply within about their own contribution, their own ability to take personal responsibility in their lives.
And that's what leads them down the path towards self-forgiveness, is that right?
Exactly.
Yes, it's when if we describe what we do in one word, we tell people we teach forgiveness, and in what we understand is the truest sense of the word, which is forgiving the judgments that were placed, because what occurred, of course, occurred, and from a neutral place, it's our judgments that make it right or wrong, not the actual actions. Just the actions themselves have consequences, which could either be positive or negative, depending on the choice.
Yes. And I think this kind of ties really nicely into all the work we've been talking about today, and I often reflect on it when I start to see things kind of go awry in my own life, temporarily. There's a saying that Ron and Mary often use, and I think you know where I'm going with this: outer reality reflects inner experience.
Yes, in fact, we could, radio shows limited and this is a topic which is large.
Yes.
If we were going to say that the outer experience is a mirror of inner reality, and we look at women who are in prison, and we recognize that perhaps 95% or better come from backgrounds of rather extreme physical, mental, sexual abuse. So their inner reality is one of abuse and punishment. In a way, they have made unconscious choices to select out opportunities, if I could use that word, so that their outer experience mirrors their inner reality of abuse and punishment, because that's what they learned growing up as small children.
Yeah, it really does. And I think for our listeners, it helps neatly tie in. All of us have had difficult experiences, but some of us in society have had even more intense. And the more we associate with those experiences, the more it affects our behavior, right?
Right. Well, we're having the experience, interestingly enough, with working with these women, as they change deeply, so that they recognize that who they are is not their choices. Their choices have consequences, but who they are is a divine being. And as they heal that inner reality of punishment and abuse, their outer reality starts to shift. Some of the lifers have been released from prison. There's an honor housing unit now, which is almost entirely populated by Freedom to Choose graduates.
That's awesome.
So it demonstrates. It's a really nice demonstration of that principle.
So we're going to get to the documentary here in a second, but I just want to express to the listeners that my own experiences, I did like 3 of these in a row, and I'm about to do my 4th, and I can absolutely vouch that I could see a progression in the regular inmates who would come back to the sessions. I could literally see the growth, and I could hear them talking about their lives as they changed from the sessions, and just how I was so impressed with and am so impressed with how they use the skills that we teach them every single day. It's just amazing and so beautiful to watch.
We teach what we call basic survival skills.
Yes, and they need it in there.
Yes, and there it's just more needed.
So, David, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, one other thing I just wanted to add to what you said, Greg, is that the women, most of them are actually parenting from within prison. They have children on the outside. And one of the things that's been so inspiring is to listen to their stories of how they teach these skills, their communication skills, the personal responsibility skills, the anger management skills, and forgiveness. They teach these to their children who are on the outside, and they're creating healing in their families from within prison.
It's just incredible. Yes, yes, yes. We're about to go on a break, and when we come back, let's jump right into the documentary, and then I know you want to talk about how we're expanding the program, and then how listeners can get involved from a donation perspective. You're listening to Bonnie and David on the Access Zen. I'm Gregory Foster, your host, and we'll see you in a moment.
And now, let's return to Access Zen.
Great, thanks. Glad to be back here. So, Bonnie and David, we were just kind of getting to the heart of this, which is talking about the Freedom to Choose documentary. And I know you wanted to kind of share that experience because it was pretty phenomenal as well. Am I right?
Well, one of the most amazing things about the documentary is that the reason that it was made is because volunteers to the project, who are all graduates of the university, got together and they said, the world really needs to know about this. So they went to the president of the university and said, here is a donation so that you can make a movie and describe to the world what's taking place at the Valley State Prison for Women.
And the documentary really explains in a way that it gives the viewer an experience of the essence of the work. So it's a brilliantly made documentary. It goes beyond the words. One of our volunteers in Santa Barbara asked us to show the documentary to her service group luncheon, which was the Rotary Club. And at the Rotary Club was the chairman of a committee in Santa Barbara County that was looking at how do we address the issue of all the people who are sent back to Santa Barbara from state prison, because we know that 70 to 80% will be going back to prison within a year. And how do we deal with the increasing jail population, which also has a return rate of 70 to 80%? And what can we do to assist with that? They saw the film. We were invited to present it to the committee, and the sheriff lieutenant, who was in charge of all the programming, told us very succinctly, anything you could have told us about this program, there was nothing you could say, basically, that would convince us of the value of this program before I saw the documentary. After I saw the documentary, there was nothing you could say that would unconvince me of the value of this program, and that led to our expansion into the Santa Barbara County community, which involves men and women.
Well, before we go there, let's come back a second. So when was the documentary filmed, and what was that experience like? How did you go about making this?
Well, the documentary was filmed in 2007, and essentially we took a film crew with us to an actual Freedom to Choose prison project. So they simply followed us around, and our commitment was always to the work that's being done there first. And they did a phenomenal job of shadowing us, of filming everything, of listening in on the little trio exercises that people do together. And then they took their footage and created this movie, which ultimately has become an award-winning documentary.
Yes, it has. What was that experience like for the two of you? Because obviously I've experienced it, in person. What was it like doing that with the cameras rolling?
Well, I have to say that it was, except for some minor technical stuff like making sure the microphone's connected to their particular sound system. Once we were in the program, I had very little, if any, awareness while we were doing the event that there was a movie crew actually operating. They were really very successfully in the background. At one point, the only concern I actually had at one point in time was I was watching the director of the program listening in during the trios, and I was checking in with him when we were not up in front of the room and to see how he was, and he had just tears were just running down his face. And I was wondering, would he be able to capture the essence of this? Because it was very difficult for people to write about their experience in a way that shares it. We would get emails after the event going, how was it for you? And they would go, can't write yet, more later, a week or two after the program.
Great. So I know you want to talk about how you're expanding, but maybe, Bonnie, you could just tell us real briefly about winning that award and what that was like and what that meant to you and also to the University of Santa Monica and probably the inmates as well.
Well, the award that you're referring to is the The 22-minute documentary short won the Best Documentary in the Cannes Film Festival in 2009 in the Emerging Filmmaker Showcase. And that was really a thrilling surprise for everybody. We were sitting in the USM classroom at the time when we heard the news, and one of the directors was in France at the film festival. And I think the part that moved me the most is that he said as he was going through the rest of the events at the festival, people continually came up to him and spoke to him of how moving this film was, how much it touched them. And he's not in the movie, so that they recalled who he was and were able to speak to him and remember that he was the one who was one of the makers of the film was remarkable to me.
That's incredible. Well, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I do encourage our listeners on my website. There is a link that you can take you, and you can click on it, and it'll open up into the video. And David, we will be updating that so it goes to your website so that the listeners also have the ability to see your documentary and also donate to the project, because I do want to encourage everyone, and maybe Bonnie could spend a moment talking about that you are a foundation and you can accept donations tax deductible. And then, let's talk about your expansion plans very briefly, and we've got about 2 minutes.
Well, we created a foundation, a public charity, 501c3 nonprofit foundation, so that we can expand this work, and we are intending to expand it in the prison so that we can offer this program to all of the women's prisons in California, and also to a community project. And as you mentioned, we do have a website, freedomtochoose.net, and the .net is important. And we describe the different programs that we are expanding into. And because in California the state government budget is in, let's just say, dire straits, there's very little to no money going to educational programming in prisons. And education is the one thing that has demonstrated to be helpful to people in terms of transforming their lives to productive citizenry once they return to society.
Yes, and I think, David, you were talking about that the typical inmate, 70-80% of the time, is going to end up back in prison. Do we have any statistics on folks that have gone through this program and how that looks? I know the anecdotal evidence is overwhelming, but do you have anything else?
We have surveys which are highly significant. We have reports, what we call triangulated qualitative data, which is a fancy way of saying more than one person noticed something that's descriptive. The prison staff have noticed this shift. One of the statistics we've heard is that it's unusual for lifers to be released. However, since the program has started, a number of them have been released, and they've all been graduates of taking the program more than once, so they've been mentors. And to date, all of them have stayed out, which is an incredible single statistic. One of the things that we have now is the ability, if we do an expansion as we've planned, built into that is the funding to do the actual data collection, get the numbers, both at the prison and in the Santa Barbara Community Project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining the show. Very compelling story. I feel like we could go on and on. I'm sure there's some great stories out there. Once again, how do the listeners find you?
The website is freedomtochoose.net, www.freedomtochoose.net. There's contact information if listeners want to write in and get on a newsletter subscription. There's an opportunity to watch the video. There's an opportunity to donate. There's detailed descriptions of all of the expansion programs, and we just love to hear from listeners.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm sure you're going to get some wonderful feedback, and I really appreciate you being on the show. Wonderful show. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Greg.
Greg.
Thank you for the opportunity, Greg.
Wonderful. All right. Take care.
You too.
All right. I'm Gregory Foster. You've been listening to Access Zen. Have a great week. Take care.